She shouldn't be in here. She's not ready. The voice boomed as the new nurse was shoved out of the emergency zone during the most critical moment. She stood still, offering no argument, only observing everything with an unnervingly calm gaze. "We don't have time to babysit," a Navy SEAL snapped, turning his back on her. No one asked who she was. No one noticed how she memorized every exit. Then an explosion rocked the hallway. Gunfire followed, freezing the entire room in terror. Chaos erupted in seconds, and the first person to move was the nurse they just discarded. Lena Brooks was 26 years old, but if you look closely at her eyes, you would see the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. She was the newest addition to the City General Hospital's Level 1 Trauma Center. To the senior medical staff, she was just a green nurse, someone who had the degree but hadn't yet been blooded by the raw, grinding reality of a mass casualty event. Lena was a woman of absolute silence and terrifying efficiency. She didn't engage in the typical hospital break room gossip. She didn't complain about the double shifts or the cold coffee. She arrived exactly 15 minutes before her shift began, and she left the moment her relief checked in. Her movements were always economical, almost robotic. She restocked the gauze, organized the surgical trays, and monitored the vitals of the stable patients in the overflow wing. Her supervisor, a harried woman named Brenda, saw Lena as reliable but unremarkable. "She lacks the spark," Brenda would often say to the other senior nurses. "She's efficient, sure, but she looks like she's a world away. I'm not sure she can handle it when the real sirens start screaming." They gave her the tasks that required no emotional investment. They treated her like a placeholder, a shadow in blue scrubs moving through the fluorescent-lit corridors. But Lena Brooks lived in a world of constant observation. While the other nurses were scrolling through their phones during their 10-minute breaks, Lena was studying the hospital's floor plans. She knew the location of every service elevator, every laundry chute, and every backup generator. She knew which doors required a key card and which ones could be breached with a heavy shoulder. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a sentinel. The Tuesday shift started like any other, but the air felt heavy, charged with a static that Lena recognized from her previous life. At 2 p.m., the silence was shattered by a radio call that made the entire ER freeze. "Inbound, multiple gunshot wounds, high-velocity trauma, ETA 3 minutes." The hospital doors hissed open, and a team of 6 Navy SEALs burst through. They weren't in uniform, but their tactical gear and the way they occupied the space screamed special operations. They were carrying a stretcher, and on it was a man whose chest was a roadmap of blood and shrapnel. These were men who lived in the heart of violence, and right now they were desperate, exhausted, and incredibly dangerous. The lead surgeon, Dr. Eris, rushed forward, but the SEALs wouldn't step back. They formed a tight, protective perimeter around their fallen brother. They were on edge, their eyes darting to every stranger who approached. Lena stepped forward, her hands as steady as a mountain, holding a tray of specialized vascular clamps and a high-flow chest tube kit. She had anticipated the need before the doctor had even asked. "Wait!" One of the SEALs, a massive man with a jagged scar across his knuckles and eyes like cold flint, stepped into Lena's path. He looked at her youthful face, her tied-back hair, and her clean, unironed bod scrubs. To him, she looked like a college student who would faint at the first sight of deep arterial spray. "She shouldn't be in here. She's not ready for this. We need a veteran, not a trainee." Lena didn't flinch. She didn't try to defend her credentials or list her years of clinical study. She didn't even look at the man's massive hand resting on her shoulder. She simply stood her ground, her gaze fixed on the wounded man on the table. "The lead surgeon needs these vascular clamps now, or your teammate won't have a leg to stand on by sunset," she said, her voice soft but carrying a strange metallic weight. The SEAL, whose call sign was Elias, ignored her warning. He physically nudged her toward the door, replacing her with a more senior, frantic nurse who was already fumbling with the sterile packaging. "Go find someone with more experience. We don't have time for mistakes or amateurs. This is a Tier 1 asset on this table. Move." Lena retreated without a word. She didn't feel the sting of the insult. She didn't have room for ego. She stood by the nurse's station just outside the reinforced glass doors of Trauma Bay 1. Most people would have been offended or moved to tears by the blatant disrespect. But Lena was busy. Her eyes were moving in a rhythmic, practiced sweep of the hallway. She noted the heavy steel oxygen cart parked near the laundry chute, a perfect barricade. She noted the weight and balance of the industrial fire extinguisher on the wall, a blunt force weapon, if needed. Then her gaze shifted to the hospital's south entrance. Three men in civilian clothes had just entered. They wore oversized jackets despite the 90-degree heat outside. Their hands were buried deep in their pockets. They weren't looking at the signs for the cafeteria, they were looking at the security cameras. They moved with a predatory synchronization that Lena had seen in a dozen different countries. The other nurses whispered about how rude the army guys were, but Lena remained silent. She was listening to the sounds of the building, the distant chime of the elevators, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum, and then a faint mechanical metallic click coming from the hallway behind the vending machines. She knew that sound. It was ingrained in her muscle memory, a sound she had heard thousands of times in the silence of the desert. It wasn't the sound of a medical device. It was the sound of a safety selector being clicked off on a submachine gun. In the eyes of the staff, she was just a new girl who wasn't up to the task. But Lena Brooks was currently the only person in that building who realized the hospital was no longer a sanctuary. It was a kill zone. If you believe that the most skilled people are often the ones who stay quiet, type unfair. The explosion wasn't deafening, but it was surgical. A breaching charge blew the hinges off the secondary service entrance, sending a cloud of white dust and drywall through the corridor. Smoke filled the hallway instantly, triggering the sprinklers. Before the fire alarms could even begin to wail, masked gunmen moved into the lobby with a terrifying, synchronized speed. The hospital erupted into a symphony of screams. Patients and staff dove under desks, and the SEALs inside the trauma room went for their sidearms, only to realize they had left their primary gear in their transport vehicle parked 3 blocks away for security reasons. They were trapped in a room with a dying brother, limited ammunition, and zero tactical advantage. While everyone else was paralyzed by fear, Lena Brooks moved. She didn't scream, she didn't drop her tray, she didn't hesitate. Her transition from nurse to operator was instantaneous. In one fluid, athletic motion, she grabbed a heavy medical oxygen tank and rolled it across the floor toward the entrance of the trauma ward. "Stay down! Close the internal shutters!" she commanded. The authority in her voice was so sharp, so absolute, that even the SEALs inside the room looked up in shock. It was the voice of a commander. And I was a commander, not a trainee. The first gunman rounded the corner, his weapon raised. Lena didn't wait for him to find a target. She used the heavy steel cart she had noted earlier, kicking it with a powerful, calculated strike of her heel. The cart slammed into the gunman's knees with the sound of snapping wood, sending him crashing to the floor. Before he could recover, Lena was on him. She didn't use a knife, she used a pair of heavy trauma shears. With a series of rapid technical strikes to the temple and the throat, she neutralized the threat in 3 seconds. She didn't kill him, but he wasn't getting back up. She stripped the submachine gun from his hands and checked the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist, a movement so natural it was terrifying to behold. One of the SEALs, Elias, watched through the glass doors. He saw the new nurse move with the grace of a predator. Her footwork was perfect. Her weight distribution was tactical. She wasn't just fighting, she was executing a pre-programmed response to an ambush. She was moving in the flow state that only veterans of high-intensity conflict ever achieve. Lena looked at Elias through the glass and made a series of rapid hand signals. 2 shooters, north hallway, 1 in the stairwell. I am engaging. Cover the door and the patient. Elias froze. Those weren't civilian gestures. Those were advanced Marine Corps tactical signals, specifically used by elite scout sniper units. He realized with a jolt of adrenaline that they had just insulted a sister-in-arms. He grabbed a discarded chair leg and signaled his men to hold the door. Lena moved through the smoke like a ghost. She knew the hospital's layout better than the attackers. She wasn't running. She was hunting. She reached the laundry chute and climbed onto a narrow maintenance ledge. From this elevated position, she could see the 2 remaining gunmen trying to suppress the security desk. She didn't have a long rifle, but she had a sniper's mind. She calculated the windage of the air conditioning vents in the distance across the lobby. She waited. She slowed her breathing until her heart rate dropped. She waited for the beat between her heartbeats. She fired 2 shots, 2 rounds, 2 targets down, both headshots. She dropped from the ledge and began dragging a wounded elderly patient toward a reinforced supply closet. She signaled for a group of terrified residents to follow her. "You," she pointed to a resident doctor who was shaking so hard he could barely stand. "Apply pressure on her leg. Now, don't look at the smoke. Don't look at the blood. Look at me. If you stop, she dies. Do your job." The gunmen were part of a specialized mercenary cell sent by a cartel leader to finish the job on the SEAL they had ambushed earlier. They were well trained, but they hadn't planned for a ghost in the halls. Lena moved into the ventilation room, cutting the main power to the floor. The hallway went pitch black, leaving only the eerie red glow of the emergency lights. This was her element. Inside Trauma Bay 1, the SEALs were in awe. They were watching the security monitors that were still functioning on backup power. They saw the girl they called a baby moving through the darkness, taking down professional killers with a cold, terrifying efficiency. "Who is she?" one of the SEALs whispered. "She's a ghost," Elias replied, his voice full of shame, "and she's the only reason we're still breathing." Lena wasn't done. She knew there was a third team. She had counted the SUVs in the parking lot earlier. She checked the submachine gun's magazine. Empty. She dropped it and drew the handgun from her belt, the one she had taken from the first shooter. She moved toward the service elevator. She knew they were coming from the basement. She climbed into the ceiling tiles, disappearing into the darkness above the elevator doors. When the doors hissed open and 3 mercenaries stepped out. Lena didn't fire immediately. She waited until they were in the center of the hallway. Then she dropped. It was a symphony of violence. She used the tight space of the corridor to her advantage, using the walls to pivot and strike. She moved like a whirlwind, her scrubs becoming stained with the evidence of the struggle. By the time Elias and his team reached the elevator bank, Lena was standing over 3 unconscious men, her breathing barely elevated. She looked at Elias, her eyes reflecting the red strobe of the alarm. "The roof is the final objective. They have a bird coming for extraction. If we don't stop it, they'll have high ground support. If you've ever realized you completely misjudged someone's strength." Type, I was wrong. Elias and his team moved out of the trauma bay, now armed with the weapons Lena had secured from the fallen attackers. They found her in the hallway, standing over a map of the hospital's electrical grid, her face illuminated by the red strobe of the alarm. "Who the hell are you?" Elias whispered, his voice full of a new, heavy respect. Lena didn't look up from the map. "I'm the nurse who wasn't ready." "I'm ready." "Remember? Now shut up and listen. They have a third team coming up the service elevator from the basement. They're trying to flank you. I'm going to the roof to take the high ground. You hold the junction at the elevators. Do not let them reach the patient." "Lena, wait." Elias reached for her arm. "You're a Marine, aren't you? That signal, that was 2nd Battalion. I recognize the hand speak." Lena stopped. She looked at him, and for the first time, the mask of the junior nurse dropped completely. Behind her eyes was a history of long nights in the dirt, the cold weight of a long-range rifle, and the silence of the hunt. The Marine sniper Lena Brooks hadn't always been a nurse. 3 years ago, she had been Corporal Brooks, a lead scout sniper for a specialized Marine unit. She was a legend in her division, known for having the highest cold-bore accuracy in her regiment. She had served 2 tours in the most contested valleys of the Middle East, taking shots that most people only see in movies. She was a hunter of hunters, a woman who lived in the shadows and spoke through the crack of a .308 round. The choice to heal. During her final mission, her unit was compromised by an informant. She had been forced to watch through her scope as her spotter and best friend were lost because she couldn't get a clear shot through a crowded market filled with innocent children. She had the target in her crosshairs, but the risk of collateral damage was too high. She chose to hold her fire, and she lost everything because of it. The trauma of that moment, of being unable to save the life that mattered most, had broken her heart, but not her spirit. She left the Corps the day her contract ended. She decided that if she was going to spend the rest of her life in high-pressure rooms, It wouldn't be to take lives, it would be to save them. She became a nurse to atone for the lives she had been forced to take from 1,000 yards away. She wanted to feel the warmth of a pulse instead of the cold steel of a trigger. "I'm not a Marine anymore," Lena said firmly, her voice echoing in the dark hallway. "I'm a nurse, and my patients are still in danger. Get to the junction. I'll handle the roof." She vanished into the stairwell before Elias could say another word. On the roof, the rain was beginning to pour, mirroring the night of her final mission in the valley. She found a vantage point overlooking the hospital's main entrance and the secondary helipad. She didn't have her custom bolt-action rifle, but she had the handgun she'd recovered and a tactical light she had scavenged from the maintenance room. The third mercenary team arrived in a black SUV, preparing to storm the lobby to reinforce their men. As they stepped out, Lena began to fire. At that distance, in the rain, with a handgun, the shots were nearly impossible. But Lena didn't miss. She disabled the driver and pinned the rest of the team behind the engine block. She wasn't shooting to kill now, she was shooting to contain. She was using her sniper's knowledge of geometry and cover to turn a parking lot into a prison. Below, the SEALs moved in to clean up the rest. The coordination was flawless. It was a symphony of special operations. With Lena providing oversight from the roof and the SEALs clearing the interior, the threat was neutralized in record time. Within 10 minutes, the hospital was secure. The local SWAT team arrived to find the mercenaries zip-tied and neutralized with no civilian casualties. As the smoke cleared and the emergency lights were replaced by the harsh white glow of the generators, Lena Brooks walked back into the trauma ward. She was covered in soot, her scrubs were torn at the shoulder, and her hands were slightly trembling. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the life she thought she had buried. She walked straight to the sink, washed her hands with surgical soap for 30 seconds, and walked over to the SEAL who was still on the operating table. She checked his IV drip and adjusted his oxygen mask with the gentle touch of a healer. She was no longer Corporal Brooks. She was Nurse Lena. The surgeon and the SEAL team stood in a circle around her, a profound, heavy silence filling the room. Elias stepped forward and did something no one in that hospital had ever seen. He snapped his heels together and gave a crisp, formal salute to the junior nurse. The other SEALs followed suit immediately. They didn't see a new girl anymore. They saw a warrior who had protected them when they were vulnerable. They saw a hero who had chosen mercy over the trigger. Lena just nodded once, checked the patient's pulse, and went back to her chart. The room remained silent, but the respect was louder than any explosion. If you believe that true strength is the power to choose peace after seeing war, type, "I am indebted." In the days following the attack, the hospital was a different place. The story of the sniper nurse had become a legend among the staff. The senior nurses who had once given Lena the dirty work now looked at her with a mixture of awe, respect, and deep guilt. The hierarchy of the hospital had been shattered by the reality of her courage. Brenda, the supervisor who had questioned her spark, couldn't even meet Lena's eyes in the hallway. The chief of medicine and the hospital board offered Lena a promotion to a specialized security medical liaison role. It came with a massive salary, her own office, and a title that would make her the face of the hospital's new safety protocols. They wanted to use her story for public relations, to show the city how safe the hospital was with a war hero on staff. Lena turned it all down. Every bit of it. "I didn't come here to be a hero or a liaison," she told the board during a private meeting. "I came here to be a nurse. I came here to be close to the people who need help. If you truly want to thank me, take the money for that promotion and use it to fund the new pediatric wing we talked about last month. Those kids need doctors more than I need a title. I don't want a desk, I want a stethoscope." The most significant change, however, was in the SEAL team. Elias visited the hospital every single day while his teammate, Miller, recovered from his surgeries. He no longer walked in like he owned the place. He didn't demand attention or priority. He brought coffee for the entire nursing staff. He spent hours talking to the families in the waiting room, helping them understand what their loved ones were going through. He had been humbled by the woman he had tried to push aside. One afternoon, Elias found Lena in the hospital garden during her 15-minute break. She was sitting on a wooden bench, staring at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set over the city skyline. "I wanted to apologize again, Lena," Elias said. sitting a respectful distance away on the bench. I've spent my whole career thinking that if someone wasn't in a uniform, they weren't in the fight. I thought I knew what ready looked like. I was arrogant. I was wrong. You were more prepared than any of us. You were our overwatch when we didn't even know we were being hunted. Lena looked at him and smiled, a real, weary, but genuine smile. In the Corps, we were taught that the mission is everything. We were taught to look through the scope and see a target, a variable to be removed. But here, the person is everything. It took me a long time to learn the difference. It took me a long time to realize that saving one person in a hospital room is just as important as winning a battle in a valley. You saved us, Lena, not just with the handgun on the roof, but by keeping your cool when the rest of the world was screaming. You were the only one who saw it coming because you never stopped being a sentinel. You have a gift for seeing the darkness before it arrives. I'm just doing my job, Elias, she replied softly. Only now the stakes feel higher because I actually know the names of the people I'm protecting. I'm not just pulling a trigger, I'm holding a line. From that day on, the hospital's culture shifted permanently. Respect wasn't based on seniority, titles, or how many degrees were on the wall. It was based on the quiet competence and character people brought to the table. Lena Brooks remained a nurse. She continued to work the night shifts. She continued to care for the forgotten patients and the difficult cases. But she was no longer invisible. She was the silent shield of the hospital, a woman who had seen the absolute worst of humanity and decided to respond with the absolute best of it. If you believe that the strongest people are those who carry the most hidden scars, type, I will be kind. A month later, the SEAL she had saved, Miller, was finally discharged. He walked out of the hospital on his own 2 feet, leaning slightly on a cane but with his head held high. He was flanked by his brothers, the men who had been in that room when the world exploded. As they passed the nursing station, they all stopped. There was no shouting, no fanfare, and no cameras. They simply stood at attention and nodded to Lena. It was a silent pact between warriors. They knew what she had sacrificed to stay in that ward. Elias stayed behind for a moment as the others moved toward the exit. The commander wants to know if you'd ever consider coming back to the base, Lena. Not as a sniper, as a senior medical instructor for the teams. They need someone who understands the transition from the field to the ward. They need your perspective. Lena looked around the trauma ward. She saw a young boy getting his first set of stitches after falling off a bike. She saw an elderly woman holding her husband's hand as he woke up from surgery. She saw the mess, the pain, the smell of antiseptic, and the beautiful, messy, wonderful reality of healing. Tell the commander thank you, Lena said softly, her eyes bright and clear. But I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I spent enough time looking at the world through a scope. I like being close enough to hold someone's hand now. I prefer the healing over the hunting. Elias smiled. I figured you'd say that. You always did have the best vision in the regiment. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small, weathered coin, a Marine Corps Sniper Challenge coin worn smooth at the edges. On the bowing back, someone had hand-etched the words, "Saving feels different." Lena watched them leave until their shadows vanished from the lobby. She tucked the coin into her pocket, felt its weight, and turned back to her computer. There were charts to update. There were supplies to restock. There was work to be done. The world often thinks of strength as a loud noise, a gunshot, a crashing door, a shouted command. But as Lena Brooks walked into the next patient's room to change a bandage, she knew the truth. Strength is the quiet hand that stops the bleeding in the dark. Strength is the calm voice in the middle of a storm that tells you it's going to be okay. She wasn't a baby anymore. She wasn't an extra. She was a woman who had mastered the art of death, only to realize that the ultimate victory was found in the persistence of life. Lena Brooks went home that night, slept a dreamless sleep, and woke up the next day to do it all again. Because she wasn't a Marine sniper anymore. She was a nurse, and to her that was the highest rank she would ever hold. Never judge a person by their current position, their silence, or the quietness of their voice. True strength is not found in the weapons you carry or the battles you've won, but in the choices you make when the world falls apart around you. The person you overlooked today might be the only one standing between you and the darkness tomorrow. If you believe that character is more important than a title, comment, respect, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel SN Touching Stories for more powerful, true, and inspiring stories about the everyday heroes who walk among us. Thank you for watching.